Tonight we're stepping into the raw, intoxicating, and decidedly unglamorous reality behind a powder that once promised everything. Forget the movie versions. Living it truthfully was draining. Before you settle in, you can like and subscribe, but only if you honestly enjoy what happens here. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always intriguing to see this strange global gathering come together. Phone face down, volume turned low. Let's step inside. High in the razor-thin air of the Andes, where every breath is labor and the sun behaves like a merciless deity, a simple green leaf meant far more than nourishment. For thousands of years it was a sacrament. Long before empires glittered with gold, long before Spanish ships clawed across the horizon, there was coca, the sacred leaf. Its beginnings dissolve into the deep prehistory of South America, a faint echo in the archaeological records stretching back at least 8 millennia. Chemical traces of its alkaloid have been discovered in the hair of ancient mummies from the Peruvian coast bodies, wrapped in exquisite textiles and interred with a small pouch, a chuspa, cradling a carefully kept cluster of dried leaves. This was no idle pastime, it was a solemn pact between people and a merciless landscape. The plant itself is modest, a shrub more than a tree, with bright oval leaves and small white blossoms that ripen into red berries. It thrives on the steep, damp slopes of the Yungas, the eastern Andean foothills, a precarious vertical realm where clouds cling stubbornly to the mountainsides. Here, ancient societies cut steps into the very bones of the earth, stacking stones into elaborate terraces that climb toward the heavens, carving staircases of farmland for their holy crop. For the Inca, the last and most vast of the Andean empires, this leaf sat at the very center of their universe. They revered it as Mama Coca, a mother spirit, a divine offering from the sun god Inti to ease the pain of his children. But this celestial gift was not freely shared, and it certainly was not universal. The Incan state was a masterpiece of absolute control, a centrally orchestrated empire linked together by an immense lattice of stone-paved roads. Coca was a strictly regulated state resource, its consumption a carefully guarded privilege. It belonged to the Sapa Inca, the royal family, the high priesthood, and a few sanctioned groups whose access was as political as it was spiritual. When priests prepared to converse with the gods or peer into the uncertain shape of the future, they packed a wad of leaves into the cheek, chewing slowly and patiently as its strength seeped out. Once spent, the leaves would be tossed onto a ceremonial cloth, and the patterns they formed were studied as omen signposts for decisions of governance, warfare, life and death. High-ranking officials traveling the empire carried measured rations of coca. When a commoner was drafted into the Maita, the mandatory labor service that raised the temples of Cusco and the stone citadels of Machu Picchu, he, too, received a daily portion of leaves. This was never about pleasure. It was sustenance of a different order. It dulled hunger's claws, softened the edge of fatigue, and helped fend off the crushing toll of altitude. The arteries of the empire were its roads, and their blood was the chasqui, the imperial couriers. These runners were the Incas' living internet, a relay chain capable of relaying a message from Quito to Cusco more than 1,000 miles in under a week. They sprinted in brutal intervals from one stone outpost to the next, and the coca leaf was their constant ally. It allowed them to devour mountain passes, to run until their lungs scorched, and to deliver the emperor's commands before news could grow old. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1532, they watched this custom through the narrow frame of their own theology and saw only paganism. Catholic clergy denounced the leaf as an instrument of the devil, a hindrance to salvation. Early edicts issued from Lima tried to outlaw its cultivation and use entirely. But moral outrage soon collided with something far more persuasive: money. Spain had not crossed the ocean in search of converts. They had come for metal, specifically silver. And at a brutal elevation of around 13,000 feet, they discovered a mountain that was essentially made of it. Potosi. Ripping that silver from the mountain's core demanded labor, an endless supply of expendable bodies. The Spanish adopted and twisted the old meter system, driving vast numbers of indigenous men into suffocating tunnels deep underground. The work was savage, the environment deadly. Miners succumbed to tunnel collapses, to mercury poisoning from the refining process, to pure annihilating exhaustion. It did not take long for the colonizers to grasp what the Inca had always understood. Coca could push the human body beyond its natural limits. It allowed mine owners to feed less, demand more, and squeeze additional ore out of each half-starved worker at lower cost. The church's resolve soon crumbled. Priests who had condemned coca as demonic soon held title to coca plantations. A leaf that had been a God-touched privilege was downgraded into a wager mechanism of imperial control. It greased the gears of an enormous extraction machine, funneling Andean wealth across the Atlantic and bankrolling the golden age of a European empire half a world away. For 3 centuries, the leaf stayed in its ancestral mountains, both a local sacrament and a local sorrow, its true potential still dormant, waiting for inquisitive minds on another continent to find the key. That key would be turned not in a shrine, but in a laboratory. As the 19th century broke, European science slipped into a feverish mania of classification and dissection, intent on taking the natural world apart, molecule by molecule. Botanists and chemists fixated on alkaloids, those potent nitrogen-based compounds tucked inside plants. They had already distilled morphine from opium poppies, quinine from cinchona bark, and caffeine from coffee beans. The unremarkable-looking coca leaf, which had begun to cross the Atlantic in dry bundles, destined for curiosity cabinets and pharmacological experiments, naturally drew their attention. In 1855, a German chemist named Friedrich Gaedtke isolated a rough, yellowish substance he dubbed erythroxylin. His method was clumsy, the result impure. The true breakthrough came 5 years later, in 1860, in the quiet academic town of Göttingen. There, a graduate student, Albert Niemann, working in the orbit of the celebrated chemist Friedrich Wöhler, refined the process. Through careful sequences of washes and distillations, he separated out a pure crystalline, alkaloid white, odorless, and strikingly bitter. In his doctoral thesis, Niemann noted that just a few granules on the tongue produced a sudden numbness, a brief anesthetic deadening. He gave the new compound a properly scientific name, blending the plant's name with the typical alkaloid suffix, cocaine. At first, the world barely noticed. The discovery sat quietly in scholarly publications, a technical footnote in the triumphant march of chemistry. Its dramatic entrance onto the world stage would arrive not via science, but via commerce and in a wineglass. In Paris, a savvy Corsican entrepreneur named Angelo Mariani had a moment of inspiration. He recognized that the European public was weary, anxious, and enamored with the promise of modern, scientific tonics that could restore vigor. In 1863, he began importing large quantities of premium Peruvian coca leaves and soaking them in fine Bordeaux. The alcohol acted as a solvent, pulling out the cocaine and turning the wine into a potent, easily drinkable pick-me-up. He christened his creation Vin Mariani. It became a phenomenon. Mariani had a marketer's instinct decades ahead of his time. He sought endorsements from the most illustrious figures on earth. Popes Leo III and Pius II lent their names to it. Leo even awarded Mariani a gold medal from the Vatican. Queen Victoria drank it. Thomas Edison credited it with helping him endure long, sleepless stretches of work. Ulysses S. Grant sipped it while battling throat cancer and racing to finish his memoirs. Writers such as Émile Zola and Jules Verne wrote glowing praises. Everywhere, advertisements flaunted Vin Mariani as the supreme antidote to exhaustion, melancholy, and spiritual drift. A perfect elixir for the frenetic optimism of the Belle Époque. Behind the miracle branding stood a formidable logistics system, a global chain stretching from terraced coca fields in the Andes to a bustling factory in France, which then shipped millions of bottles of cocaine-laced wine across the planet. Across the Atlantic, the United States, never slow to remix a European success, followed suit. In Atlanta, Georgia, a pharmacist and former Confederate officer named John Stiff Pemberton wrestled with his own demons. Severely wounded in the Civil War, he, like many veterans, had become dependent on morphine. Searching for a way out of his addiction and inspired by Mariani's product, he formulated Pemberton's French wine coca, a local take on Vin Mariani. It caught on quickly. Then, in 1886, Pemberton hit a legal wall. Fulton County enacted prohibition. Alcohol was now forbidden. Undeterred, he scrambled for an alternative base. He swapped out the wine for a sugary syrup and carbonated water, added an extract from the caffeine-heavy cola nut, and retained the coca extract. The result was a temperance-friendly beverage he named Coca-Cola. The so-called elixir of life was born, marketed at the soda fountain as a remedy for headaches, nervousness, and general fatigue. Every serving contained a very real dose of cocaine, an aspect that, for obvious reasons, the modern corporation prefers to gloss over, but which at the time was a major selling point. While entrepreneurs were busy intoxicating the public, the medical world was catching up, propelled largely by the enthusiastic advocacy of a driven young neurologist in Vienna, Sigmund Freud. In 1884, Freud had not yet founded psychoanalysis. He was an obscure researcher, hungry for a discovery that would secure his reputation and his future. Reading early reports about cocaine, he began to experiment on himself. The results thrilled him. In his famous essay Über Coca, he praised the substance in glowing, almost lyrical language. He pronounced it a miracle remedy, a banisher of sadness, a stimulant that produced exhilaration and a sustained euphoria, apparently free of harmful side effects. Most disastrously, he touted it as a treatment for morphine addiction. He handed it out readily to patients, to close friends, to his fiancée Martha, to strengthen them and bring color to their cheeks. Freud's intellectual prestige stamped cocaine with a legitimacy it had never enjoyed. It was no longer just an ingredient in a popular tonic. It became a serious medical tool. His writing sparked the curiosity of a colleague, ophthalmologist Carl Koller, who revisited Niemann's remark about numbness. In a series of ingenious experiments, Koller discovered that applying a cocaine solution directly to the eye rendered it completely insensitive to pain. In 1884, he demonstrated this power to a room of physicians, performing eye surgery on a fully conscious dog, and then on a human patient, without eliciting a sign of agony. The audience was astounded. This was the birth of local anesthesia. It transformed surgery, especially in delicate specialties like ophthalmology and dentistry. Before cocaine, such operations had to be lightning fast or performed with the patient unconscious under ether or chloroform. Now, a surgeon could operate slowly and precisely on a specific area while the patient stayed awake and pain-free. In the last 2 decades of the 1800s, cocaine reigned supreme. It was the Victorian miracle cure, the wonder drug of modernity. The American pharmaceutical firm Park Davis sold it in virtually every form imaginable, as powder, as cigarettes, in neat hypodermic kits complete with vials of cocaine hydrochloride, even in their own Coca-Cola-inspired soft drink, Coca-Colane. Singers and public speakers could buy cocaine-laced throat lozenges. Parents could purchase teething drops containing it for their infants. Medical journals extolled its virtues, magazines advertised it enthusiastically, and millions of people consumed it under the comforting illusion that they were simply making use of a refined, scientifically endorsed solution to the anxieties of everyday life. The Andean leaf had been stripped of its cultural spirit. Its active compound had been isolated, intensified, and unleashed on a world intoxicated by its promise and utterly unready for its price. The crash in reputation came as quickly as the ascent had. Warnings that had once been brushed off as mere anecdotes swelled into a growing chorus of concern. The miracle remedy began to show its shadow. Doctors reported a troubling pattern among their patients and, all too often, in themselves. Those who had taken cocaine for gloom or exhaustion found they could not easily stop. Euphoria curdled into paranoia, agitation, and ghastly hallucinations. A surprisingly common sensation was that of insects crawling beneath the skin, a torment that came to be called cocaine bugs or formication. The dream of heightened performance decayed into obsessive, repetitive behavior and catastrophic failures of judgment. The miracle medicine was breeding a new and vicious kind of addiction. No case damned the drug more completely than one from Freud's own circle. To help his close friend, physician Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow, overcome a crippling morphine habit, Freud prescribed heavy doses of cocaine. The result was ruinous. Fleischl-Marxow exchanged one dependency for another, even more destructive one. He spiraled into full-blown cocaine psychosis, plagued by persecutory delusions and the incessant vision of pale snakes writhing over his body. Within a few years, he was dead, shattered in mind and body. The experience deeply shook Freud. He abandoned his outspoken advocacy and seldom mentioned cocaine again. But the damage was already spreading. The spirit he had helped release was now tearing through lives on both sides of the Atlantic. Public perception shifted, fanned by a press hungry for a new demon to sell papers. Where once advertisements had exalted cocaine's benefits, newspaper columns now trumpeted its horrors. Tales of high society disgrace, brilliant prospects undone, and fortunes obliterated by the seductive white powder proliferated. In the United States, this budding panic mutated into something darker and more enduring, fusing with the country's most ancient dread: race. In the American South, lurid, evidence-free rumors spread, claiming that cocaine use was rampant among black laborers. These stories were crafted explicitly to incite white terror. Newspapers pushed sensational accounts of cocaine-crazed Negroes committing horrific crimes with inhuman strength and cunning. A notorious 1914 article in the New York Times by Dr. Edward H. Williams asserted that cocaine enhanced black men's marksmanship and rendered them temporarily resistant to pistol rounds. Southern police departments began upgrading to higher caliber sidearms, claiming they needed increased stopping power against these imagined drug-fueled monsters. This was racial mythology, carefully engineered. It recast the cocaine consumer from a mostly white middle-class medical victim into a dangerous black predator. Cocaine ceased to be seen only as an individual failing. It became framed as a menace to the social order, a spark for racial violence that warranted a strong federal response. The slow machinery of national regulation began to speed up. One major early milestone was the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, driven by muckraking journalists who exposed the dangerous and fraudulent content of many patent medicines. The act didn't outlaw any substance. Instead, it imposed a simple condition: truth in labeling. For the first time, manufacturers had to list ingredients like alcohol, morphine, and cocaine on their packaging. The reaction was immediate. Customers were appalled to learn that the soothing syrups they gave their children were loaded with opiates, and that their favorite invigorating tonics were laced with cocaine. Under public pressure and fearing financial loss, many companies quietly reformulated their products. Around 1903, even before the law formally passed, the Coca-Cola Company, ever sensitive to the shifting winds, eliminated the active cocaine alkaloid from its recipe, substituting decocainized coca leaf extract to preserve the name and flavor. But labeling requirements did not satisfy the rising ranks of reformers, temperance activists, and race-baiting demagogues calling for outright bans. International politics gave them the final push. The United States, hoping to extend its influence in Asia, wanted to help China tackle its staggering opium crisis. To take the moral high ground in global anti-drug summits, America first had to tidy up its own legal landscape. The culmination of 2 decades of mounting panic arrived in 1914 with the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. On paper, the Harrison Act was not a prohibition statute, but a tax measure, carefully worded to survive constitutional scrutiny. It required anyone who imported, produced, sold, or dispensed cocaine or opiates to register with the federal government, pay a special tax, and use official order forms. It looked like a bureaucratic formality. In practice, its enforcement would reshape American life. Treasury agents responsible for upholding the law interpreted it with maximum severity. They decreed that prescribing narcotics to addicts simply to stave off withdrawal did not qualify as legitimate medicine. Doctors who continued such practices were hounded, arrested, and prosecuted. Many ended up behind bars. Terrified, the medical profession largely withdrew from treating addiction. The impact was swift. Legal supplies of cocaine, which had once been readily available at any pharmacy, counter disappeared. A person who, just a few years earlier, would have been treated as a patient or a normal customer, was suddenly recast in law as a criminal. The act did not halt cocaine consumption, it buried it. The open doors of pharmacies and soda fountains closed. In their place swung open another door, one that led to the alleyway, the black market dealer, and a vast, violent criminal economy. Cocaine's era as a celebrated medical marvel had ended. Its reign as a public enemy and as the driver of a century of crime and conflict had only just begun. With a signature and the moral certainty of legislators, the crystalline powder was pushed from the bright counters of pharmacies and the cheerful hiss of soda fountains. It did not disappear, it simply went home with a different kind of person. Prohibition almost never kills desire, it only inflates the price and sharpens the guest list. Stripped of its therapeutic halo, cocaine underwent a startling metamorphosis. It became a secret, and costly secrets are some of the most prized status symbols of all. The powder evolved into a covert signal among a new class of elite A glittering communion shared by those who lived ahead of the curve or comfortably beyond the law's reach. In the roaring 1920s, an era soaked in bathtub gin and drunk on defiance, cocaine was a flawless accessory. It became the invisible spirit that haunted the jazz age. In the smoky, blue-lit speakeasies of New York, Chicago, and New Orleans, where the frantic stomp of the Charleston made the floorboards tremble, a slim, discreet vial marked you as truly inside. It was fast, it was modern, and it was flagrantly illegal, an embodiment of everything the decade adored. For the bob-haired flapper tasting new freedoms, it was a way to whirl through the night without slowing. For the Wall Street gambler riding a market that seemed to only climb, it was a way to feel as untouchable as his stock portfolio. The substance was murmured about, offered in low voices in hotel powder rooms or the rumbling back seats of chauffeured cars. It became the propellant for a party that believed itself immortal, a chemical assurance that both the night and the decade could blaze hotter and quicker than any that had come before. This hidden fellowship of excess had its western branch in a sun-drenched town dedicated to manufacturing dreams, Hollywood. In the flickering, silent world of early film, the pressure was extraordinary. Fortunes were assembled overnight. An unknown girl from the Midwest could become a living deity in mere months, her face towering 30 feet high in front of worshipful crowds. Studios demanded inhuman output, endless hours, relentless charisma, and perfect performance on camera and off. In that crucible of fame, the little white powder found eager hosts. They called it Girl or Nose Candy, playful names for a distinctly unforgiving master. It was the pick-me-up before a brutal night under scorching arc lights, the lubricant for debauched weekend gatherings in hidden mansions, the silent partner behind many a meteoric Hollywood rise and many catastrophic falls. When matinee idol Wallace Reed died in 1923, officially due to morphine dependence after an on-set injury, the tragedy pulled back the curtain just enough for audiences to glimpse the decay beneath the glitter. Studio executives were horrified not by the human cost, but by the risk to profits. In response, the industry tried to clean house with the Hays Code, a new moral rulebook. In reality, it merely drove the secrets deeper underground, making them all the more alluring to those with money and access. Cocaine did not belong only to revelers. It also carved out a niche among thinkers, writers, and artists. In the bohemian corners of Greenwich Village and the smoky cafes of post-war Paris, the drug was marketed as something loftier than a party trick. It was sold as a key, the thing that could unhinge perception, crack the shell of the ordinary, and power the engine of creativity through the lonely hours before dawn. For a surrealist painter, it might offer a sharp, fragmented vision. For a novelist wrestling with the great American novel, it promised a way to keep words pouring out, to blast through fatigue and doubt. It was treated as a tool, a cerebral stimulant that could sharpen thought and strip away the dullness of everyday reality. But this was a seductive illusion. The apparent bursts of creativity were often nothing more than frantic, scattered motion. Those deep insights were frequently looping, self-absorbed monologues born of scrambled neurotransmitters. Still, the myth endured. It clothed the drug in intellectual seriousness and turned it into a sacred rite for the avant-garde. Someone, of course, had to supply this shadowy world. Someone connected the Hollywood ingenue with the Parisian poet. That role fell naturally to the criminal underworld. The same hard-nosed businessmen who ran bootlegging and gambling empires saw a flawless opportunity to expand their product lines. Figures like New York crime boss Arnold Rothstein, allegedly the mastermind behind the fixed 1919 World Series, understood the basic math of vice. Cocaine was a luxury item. Low bulk, high profit, easy to conceal. It didn't call for fleets of trucks or cavernous storage like illegal liquor. A handful of reliable smugglers and a chain of discreet dealers were enough to saturate the highest circles of society. Distribution was still primitive diverted stock from legitimate pharmaceutical shipments in Europe, occasional small runs from South America, but the blueprint was being drafted. Demand was solid. Cocaine had found a new persona, a forbidden high-end indulgence, reserved for the bold, the decadent, and the doomed. It promised vitality, brilliance, and belonging. It was an expensive vow, paid first in money and then, inevitably, in other currencies entirely. While the bright young things of the global north were discovering the illicit thrill of the powder, its modern story was truly beginning far to the south, under the sharp, high-altitude sun of the Andes. For generations, indigenous communities in Peru and Bolivia had lived with the coca leaf in a way that had nothing to do with decadence. For them, it was survival. They chewed the leaves, often mixed with ash or lime to free the alkaloids, to fuel themselves for back-breaking labor at punishing heights, to endure hunger, and to mark ceremonies and healers' rites. The coca leaf was divine charity woven into their lives, a sacred crop as ordinary and essential as the potato. Its effect was mild, steady, little more than a gentle lift. The transformation of this sacred foliage into a global commodity is a story of chemistry, ambition, and geography. It did not begin with fabled cartels, but with quiet chemists, risk-takers, and smugglers who recognized an opening to link the ancient harvests of the Andes with the jittery growing appetite of the modern world. By the mid-20th century, the first real pioneers of international cocaine trafficking appeared. They were not yet the flamboyant narcos of later decades. They were pragmatic, calculating operators who preferred shadows to headlines. For a time, the main hub of this emerging trade was not Colombia at all, but Chile, the long, narrow country hugging the Pacific. In port cities like Valparaiso and in the capital, Santiago, criminals who had already mastered other smuggling trades began to see the potential of cocaine. One key figure was a Chilean woman, nicknamed the Godmother, a restaurant owner who quietly turned her establishment into a front for one of the first sizable trafficking networks of the 1960s. Her organization was advanced for its era. It didn't merely move product, it managed the entire chain of production. The steps they refined would become the template for everyone who followed, a dark sort of industrial recipe for turning green leaves into white crystals. It began in remote Andean valleys of Peru and Bolivia, where impoverished farmers harvested coca and sold it cheaply to intermediaries. The leaves were hauled into secret pits deep in the jungle. There they were drenched in gasoline or kerosene and trampled into mush often by men stomping barefoot in reeking vats. Chemicals like acids and alkaline agents were added to coax out the raw cocaine alkaloids, yielding a coarse off-white material called pasta base, or coca paste. This paste was the vital midpoint in the chain. Far more concentrated and compact than loose leaves, it was easier and more profitable to smuggle across borders. From clandestine airstrips in the Bolivian or Peruvian interior, small, often barely airworthy planes ferried the coca paste to northern Chile's deserts. There, hidden labs, sometimes little more than shacks or secret basements, handled the final refinement. Chemists, some formally trained and others self-taught, used volatile solvents like ether and acetone to purify the paste, repeatedly washing and filtering it until only gleaming crystals of cocaine hydrochloride remained. It was a dangerous, foul-smelling craft. One spark, one careless cigarette, and the entire setup could erupt in flames. But the potential rewards dwarfed the risks. A kilo of coca paste bought for a few $100s in the jungle could be refined into a kilo of pure cocaine worth thousands in Santiago and tens of thousands in New York or European capitals. Those first Chilean traffickers built the early routes, air links to staging points in Central America and the Caribbean, and couriers carrying small but valuable loads on commercial flights. What they were building slowly and almost invisibly was the first version of a multinational supply chain dedicated to a single, uniquely profitable commodity. Then, politics detonated their world. In 1973, General Augusto Pinochet led a military coup that toppled the socialist government of Salvador Allende. The new dictatorship showed little tolerance for autonomous criminal syndicates outside its control. Many of the established traffickers were arrested, executed, or scattered abroad. The Chilean connection was abruptly severed. But demand for cocaine in the United States and Europe did not vanish. It was accelerating. A void opened, and in black markets, vacuums never last. The industry needed a new base for refining coca paste and exporting pure product. It found one just to the north, in a country with a long smuggling tradition, a weak central government, and a generation of ambitious, brutally determined young men eager to claw their way to power. Colombia. The entire center of gravity of the cocaine trade shifted northward. That shift cleared the stage for a level of violence and wealth the world had never seen. The discreet, business-like Chilean smuggling of the 1960s would soon be eclipsed by something far more colossal and monstrous. The architects of this new machine did not hail from Colombia's old aristocracy. They were children of the hard, striving middle classes in places like Medellin, a rough industrial city in the country's interior. They had grown up watching the old oligarchs rule from private clubs and country estates. To them, cocaine was not merely a vice, it was history's loophole, a vehicle for a savage kind of social ascent. At the center of this new class of narco-capitalists stood a man whose name would eventually embody the drug itself, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. Escobar did not begin as a brilliant chemist or a master logistician. His real gift lay in the breadth of his ambition and his terrifying willingness to do anything. He started in Medellin's grimy underworld, stealing cars, smuggling contraband cigarettes, orchestrating kidnappings for ransom. He was ruthlessly pragmatic and possessed an instinctive sense of the two forces that move people, fear and desire. When the cocaine trade began migrating from Chile into Colombia, Escobar saw more than a chance to join in. He saw the opportunity to seize control. He recognized that true wealth didn't come from shuttling a few kilos here and there. It came from dominating every link in the chain, from the highland coca fields to the street dealer's hand. It came from turning a makeshift craft into an industry. He and a loose alliance of associates formed what came to be known as the Medellin Cartel. It was not a rigid pyramid, but a powerful consortium. Independent traffickers, cooperating for mutual benefit and mutual protection. Among these partners were the Ochoa brothers, Jorge Luis, Juan David, and Fabio Sons of a horse-breeding family who brought a touch of traditional business acumen to the enterprise. Another was Carlos Leda, a brilliant, unstable German Colombian who worshipped both John Lennon and Adolf Hitler. Leder's great innovation was logistical. He purchased a small island in the Bahamas, Norman's Cay, and transformed it into a smuggler's citadel. He laid down a runway, installed radar, and built refrigerated warehouses. From this private Caribbean outpost, a short hop from Florida, planes could ferry load after load of cocaine straight into the American bloodstream. Escobar and his partners did something simple and devastating. They applied the principles of industrial capitalism to an illegal product. They vertically integrated. They funded coca cultivation in Peru and Bolivia to guarantee raw materials. They constructed massive laboratory complexes hidden deep in Colombian jungles. Super labs that were more like self-contained villages than shacks. These compounds had airstrips, barracks for hundreds of laborers, kitchens, generators, and extensive chemical processing systems. At places like Tranquilandia, they could churn out 10 to 20 tons of pure cocaine every week. Tons, not kilos. The scale was almost beyond grasp. They were no longer simply smugglers. They were industrial producers serving a global consumer base. The logistics of transport were equally audacious. Fleets of small aircraft, each hauling a few hundred kilograms, flew from Colombia to Norman's Cay, or dropped watertight bundles into the Caribbean to be scooped up by speedboats. The cartel even experimented with submarines, crude diesel-powered subs that could move a ton or two of cocaine underwater, nearly invisible to law enforcement. Then there was the money. Profits grew so enormous they became a logistical problem of their own. Billions in cash, mostly in small denominations from American street sales, had to be repatriated to Colombia. It came back inside suitcases, crammed into aircraft landing gear, hidden in refrigerators and television sets. The cartel reportedly spent thousands of dollars each month just on rubber bands to bundle the stacks of bills. At his peak, Pablo Escobar was estimated to be among the wealthiest men on Earth, with a personal fortune in the tens of billions. He was literally richer than many countries. With that wealth came almost unimaginable power, and Escobar intended to bend Colombia itself to his will. His guiding business formula was brutally efficient, and he expressed it in two words: plata o plomo, silver or lead. If you were a police officer, judge, legislator, or journalist standing in his way, your decision tree was simple. You could accept the silver, the bribe, and not only survive, but prosper. Or you could refuse and receive the lead, a bullet, often delivered not just to you, but to your family. It was a systematized campaign of corruption and terror. The cartel infiltrated every level of the Colombian state. Judges on their payroll dismissed charges and annulled warrants. Police commanders arranged protection for major shipments. Elected officials quietly strangled any legislation that might threaten cartel interests, especially the extradition treaty with the United States, which traffickers feared far more than Colombian prisons. Escobar himself, in an audacious bid for legitimacy and legal shield, won a seat as an alternate member of Congress in 1982, hoping to cloak himself in public office. But when charm and cash couldn't carry the day, the cartel unsheathed violence. The result was a wave of narco-terror that plunged Colombia into something close to civil war. Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, the justice minister who publicly denounced Escobar and stripped him of congressional immunity, was machine-gunned in his car in Bogotá in 1984. Luis Carlos Galán, a charismatic presidential frontrunner who made the war on cartels the heart of his campaign, was assassinated at a rally in 1989. In an attempt to kill another candidate, Cesar Gaviria, the cartel bombed Avianca Flight 203, murdering all 107 people on board. Gaviria was not among them. They also detonated a massive truck bomb outside the DAS, the National Security Agency headquarters, killing 70 and injuring hundreds. This was no longer crime in the traditional sense. This was narco-terrorism. These were not the actions of a street gang, but of a parallel state, a corporate entity with its own army, its own intelligence network, and its own brutal foreign policy. openly waging war on the Colombian government. Under Escobar, the Medellin cartel took that once sacred Andean leaf and weaponized it. They did not just market a drug, they constructed an empire of corruption, addiction and dread, funded by a never-ending flood of white powder heading north. For years, this empire held an entire nation hostage, forcing millions into variations of the same choice, silver or lead, while international media focused on Medellin's volcanic violence, car bombs, assassinations, shootings in broad daylight. A different model of criminal power was maturing a few hundred kilometers south, in the sunlit city of Cali. If Escobar was a narco warlord, a loud and explosive symbol of chaos, his rivals in Cali were more refined and in many ways more dangerous. They styled themselves Los Caballeros de Cali, the Gentlemen of Cali, and they took that branding seriously. Their approach favored quiet bribes over public massacres, blackmail over bombs, and influence over spectacle. Where Escobar sought to rule through terror, they sought to rule through capture. Their operation resembled a board of directors overseeing a multinational corporation whose primary commodity happened to be cocaine. The core of the cartel consisted of four principal figures. At the top were brothers Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela. Gilberto, the elder, was called El Ajedrecista, the chess player. He was the strategist and public face, presenting himself as a respectable banker and philanthropist. Miguel, by contrast, was the operations chief, private, methodical, unsparing. He managed the day-to-day flow of a global trafficking empire, the iron hand within Gilberto's velvet glove. They had built a legitimate business conglomerate long before becoming full-scale cocaine magnates, a pharmacy chain, banks, real estate holdings, even ownership of Cali's beloved football club, America de Cali. These were not mere fronts to hide dirty money, they were profitable ventures that cemented the brothers' social status and simultaneously provided a perfect vehicle for laundering the billions that would soon arrive. The other two main partners were specialists. Helmer Pacho Herrera was the logistics and distribution mastermind. From Cali, he directed the complex networks that moved cocaine out of Colombia and supervised the sprawling distribution grids inside the United States, especially in New York. José Santa Cruz Londoño, known as Chepe, was the cartel's ambassador and trailblazer. In the late 1970s and early 80s, he personally went to New York to lay the foundation for Cali's U.S. operations, not by kicking in doors, but by renting warehouses, opening accounts, and forging business-like alliances. The Cali model was built around two pillars: intelligence and infiltration. They spent more on information networks and surveillance than on soldiers. Their counterintelligence operations became legendary, rivaling those of small states. They bribed employees at the National Telephone Company so thoroughly that they could eavesdrop on virtually every call in and out of Cali. Police, soldiers, politicians, journalists, someone in every institution answered to them. Their spies created an atmosphere of suffocating control. A lawyer thinking of taking a case against the cartel might receive a polite phone call, during which the caller casually described his children's morning route to school. No explicit threat was necessary. Under that blanket of intimidation and patronage, the cartel seemed untouchable. Unlike Escobar, who tried to stand above the law, they sought to inhabit it, bending and twisting it until it served their objectives. Their logistical innovations were equally advanced. While Medellin still leaned heavily on small aircraft and stuffed suitcases, Cali thought in container ship volumes. They grasped the principle that the best place to hide a single tree is in a forest. They dissolved cocaine in liquids, pressed it into legitimate products, and buried it inside legal cargo. Cocaine traveled concealed inside hollowed lumber, mixed into coffee shipments, or cast inside concrete fence posts, delivered by the container load to U.S. construction firms they secretly owned. Extracting the drug on arrival required specialized tools, industrial saws, chemical baths equipment far beyond the capacity of standard customs inspections. One of their more creative ploys involved freezing thousands of boxes of broccoli for export to Miami. A portion of those boxes contained not vegetables, but carefully sculpted green-tinted blocks of compressed cocaine shaped like broccoli heads. Among pallets of genuine produce in enormous freezer warehouses, they looked utterly mundane. The cartel refined money laundering into a kind of dark art. Their financial web spanned shell companies, offshore accounts in Panama and the Caribbean, and respectable businesses that rendered their proceeds indistinguishable from legitimate capital flows. They hired top-tier lawyers and accountants to exploit regulatory loopholes across jurisdictions. By the early 1990s, after Escobar's death, U.S. authorities estimated that the Cali cartel supplied roughly 80% of the world's cocaine. They had become a discreet, ruthlessly efficient near monopoly, a shadow government whose influence extended from coca farms in the Andes to corridors of power in Bogotá, and whose product reached its consumers with corporate precision. And where was this meticulously packaged, industrially shipped, expertly laundered substance headed? North into a vast, hungry market that welcomed it with open nostrils and open wallets. By the late 1970s and through the 1980s, America was undergoing a deep cultural shift. The bitterness of Vietnam and the cynicism of Watergate were giving way to a bold new celebration of ambition, consumerism, and self-interest. It was the age of Reagan, of greed is good, of high finance heroes and blockbuster cinema. Speed, success, and status became the nation's secular trinity. Cocaine, as if invented specifically for this era, emerged as the perfect sacrament. Unlike marijuana or LSD, which were linked to the counterculture and dropping out, cocaine became the drug of the strivers. It was for people who wanted more, not less, of the world. It didn't make you dreamy, it made you sharp. It didn't soften edges, it honed them. It sold itself as a chemical upgrade, promising to make you wittier, more tireless, more creative, more commanding. It was the definitive accessory of the yuppie, the young urban professional scaling the corporate hierarchy. It appeared as a thin line on mirrored coffee tables before big presentations, a quick rub on the gums before high-stakes negotiations. On Wall Street's frantic trading floors, it was the unseen engine that kept brokers wired for 20-hour days, screaming into phones, juggling torrents of information, and then, after closing bell, celebrating wins with marathon binges. In the private rooms of Hollywood studios, multi-million-dollar film deals were hammered out over glass surfaces flecked with white. Rock stars wrote songs on it, screenwriters chased inspiration with it, actors whose faces covered magazines quietly relied on it to maintain impossible schedules. The drug shed its back alley stigma and stepped into the spotlight. Nowhere was that transformation more visible than at Studio 54, New York's legendary temple of disco debauchery. Behind its velvet ropes, a curated collision of celebrities, designers, artists, and financiers played out in nightly ritual. At the core of that ritual was cocaine. It was offered on silver trays like hors d'oeuvres. The club's famous logo, a crescent moon raising a silver spoon to its nose, was an open, cheeky homage to the house stimulant. At Studio 54, cocaine wasn't a dirty secret. It was the lubricant greasing the club's entire social machine. It signaled that you belonged, that you had arrived. Even the paraphernalia acquired its own aura of luxury. Gold-plated razor blades for trimming clean lines, ornate spoons for discreet bumps, polished mirrors, and slabs of marble serving as altars for the ritual. Popular culture amplified this glow. Movies like Scarface, while technically cautionary tales, projected hypnotic visions of narco wealth and omnipotence. Radio hits and club tracks winked at white horses and snow that kept the nightlife humming. For a brief, blazing moment, cocaine transcended being just another illegal substance. It became shorthand for achievement, a sacrament in the new religion of ambition. That voracious demand created a feedback loop of staggering power. The more cocaine America consumed, the more money surged south. The more money surged south, the more the Colombian cartels modernized and hardened their operations. The gentlemen of Cali tracked the surge like analysts reading market reports. They boosted production, fine-tuned logistics, and upgraded their delivery pipelines to keep up with their richest customer. The United States became the largest, most lucrative market for the world's trendiest intoxicant, and the Colombians its near-exclusive vendors. Profits reached levels that could purchase armies, sway elections, and reshape entire economies. But cocaine's chemistry held a paradox. It was both powerful and expensive. A luxury good by its nature is exclusive. And in both chemistry and capitalism, pressures build until someone engineers a cheaper version. Eventually, someone did, and in doing so, they summoned a storm that would rip through America's poorest neighborhoods and change the country's history. The breakthrough that reshaped everything was chemically simple and financially ruthless. It didn't require a laboratory, only a stovetop and a few household supplies. Take cocaine hydrochloride, the pricey powdered form, and mix it with a basic substance like baking soda and a little water. Gently heat the mixture. As it cooks, the cocaine separates from its hydrochloride salt. When the solution cools, the free-base cocaine solidifies into small, hard crystals, or rocks. As the water boils off, the mixture makes a distinctive snapping sound. That sound gave the new product its name, crack. This small transformation changed the drug's nature in two critical ways. First, it altered how it was taken. Powdered cocaine is snorted, crack is smoked. Inhaling the vapors sends the drug racing through the lungs and into the bloodstream, delivering it to the brain in seconds. The effect is an explosive rush far more intense and immediate than snorting lines. Users described it as an overwhelming, body-flooding euphoria, unlike anything they had ever experienced. But that dizzying peak is brutally short-lived. The high lasts perhaps 5 to 10 minutes before collapsing into a steep, punishing crash. Anxiety, emptiness, craving so sharp it feels like being skinned alive from the inside. That rapid oscillation between extreme pleasure and extreme dysphoria creates one of the fastest-acting addictions known. People who had dabbled in powdered cocaine for years without losing control found themselves utterly enslaved to crack after only a few sessions. The second, even more consequential shift was economic. In the mid-1980s, a gram of powder cocaine on the street might cost around $100 more in some cities. For many, especially the poor, that price made it a distant luxury. Crack changed the equation overnight. That same gram of powder could be processed into multiple rocks. Each small rock could then be sold for $2, $3, or $5. Suddenly, the drug was affordable to almost anyone with a few crumpled bills in a pocket. It was, from the dealer's perspective, a masterpiece of predatory marketing. The drug was no longer simply for the wealthy or well-connected. It was for everyone. This new accessibility opened an enormous, previously untouched market in America's urban cores neighborhoods, already gutted by factory closures, white flight, redlining, and chronic neglect. Crack arrived not as a slow cultural drift, but as a shockwave. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, and Washington, D.C., the impact was immediate and devastating. Street corners, once home to small stores or kids playing ball, were transformed almost overnight into open-air drug bazaars running around the clock. A new generation of heavily armed young dealers emerged, battling for control of the most profitable intersections and housing blocks. The violence escalated rapidly. The discreet bump in a nightclub washroom gave way to gun battles on residential streets. The crack house, an abandoned or commandeered apartment where users could buy and smoke, became a grim emblem of the era, a place where every social norm disintegrated. Addiction tore through families. Mothers and fathers sold appliances, heirlooms, and eventually themselves for another rock that would bring a few minutes of escape. Children were left hungry, unsupervised, or abandoned altogether. A generation grew up in apartments where the carpet was littered with broken glass pipes, where strangers came and went at all hours, and where chaos was the only constant. Pregnant women, trapped in addiction, gave birth while using. The media, seizing on the most sensational narrative, coined the term crack babies. a phrase that conjured images of an entire generation neurologically destroyed before they could even crawl. Later research would reveal a more complex, less uniformly catastrophic medical reality than early headlines suggested. But the social reality those children faced, poverty, instability, trauma, was indisputably dire. The response from officials and the press focused far less on public health than on punishment. Nightly news broadcasts fixated on grainy footage of raids, infants in hospital cribs, and burned-out row houses, almost always in black neighborhoods. The archetypal cocaine user in the public imagination shifted from the sleek white banker or rock star to the young black man on a street corner, cast as both addict and predator. Media-driven fear met political calculation. The result was a legislative sledgehammer. In 1986, in the midst of election year hysteria, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. At its core was a staggering sentencing rule. Possession of just 5 grams of crack, about 2 sugar packets, worth triggered a mandatory minimum federal sentence of 5 years. Possession of powder cocaine required 500 grams to draw the same penalty. A 100-to-1 ratio was written into law. The ostensible reasoning claimed that crack was uniquely addictive and more closely tied to violence, and therefore merited harsher punishment. In practice, the disparity mapped neatly onto race and class. Powder cocaine, expensive and more common among white and middle-class users, was rarely encountered by street police in small quantity busts. Crack, cheap and prevalent in poor black neighborhoods, was exactly what aggressive patrols were designed to find. The law did not just punish a substance, it punished a population. The result was an explosion in incarceration rates. Young black men were sent away in staggering numbers, often for non-violent offenses involving tiny quantities. Entire family structures collapsed as fathers, sons, and brothers disappeared into prisons for years, sometimes decades. The drug war did little to slow the flow of cocaine, but it succeeded in hollowing out already fragile communities and cementing a sense of profound state-sanctioned injustice. Thus, the American cocaine story fractured into 2 parallel realities, divided by chemistry and class. In penthouses and private clubs, powder remained a risky but glamorous indulgence, the fuel of the ambitious and the privileged. In housing projects and rundown blocks, its cheaper, smokable twin became a shorthand for decline and despair, the spark for a war on drugs that in practice was a war on the poor. 2 sides of the same white substance, one hailed as the lubricant of success, the other demonized as the rot of the underclass. It was the fullest, cruelest expression of a drug that had long sold a fantasy of power while delivering devastation. The gentlemen of Cali, scanning profit sheets rather than newspaper headlines, were largely indifferent to the exact form their product took once it crossed the border. For them, it was a question of volume, margins, and territory. But on American streets, the numbers told a different tale, a story of chemistry and economics colliding with race and policy to produce a uniquely American catastrophe. And in the theater of politics, this catastrophe became justification for escalation. The powder that had once been toasted in salons and snorted in boardrooms had morphed into a specter so frightening that the only acceptable response, it seemed, was war. Officially, that war had been declared before. President Nixon had used the phrase "war on drugs" years earlier. But his campaign still looked, at least partially, like a public health initiative funding treatment programs and commissions alongside enforcement. The drug war of the 1980s was something else entirely, an openly militarized campaign with soldiers, hardware, and a tally of dead. It crystallized on paper. The 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, beyond its sentencing disparities, was a blueprint for a more aggressive state apparatus. Judicial discretion gave way to inflexible sentencing grids. Possessing a certain weight meant a guaranteed number of years, no matter the circumstances, no matter who you were. The boundaries between police work and military operations began to blur. Surplus military gear, once destined for far-off battlefields, found its way into local police arsenals. Armored personnel carriers rolled down suburban streets. Officers traded blue uniforms for black tactical gear, helmets, and M16s. Flashbang grenades became standard tools. The police officer, as neighborhood guardian, gave way to the image of a domestic soldier. The signature tactic of this new era was the no-knock raid. In the dead of night, heavily armed teams smashed through doors without warning, hurling flashbangs, forcing residents to the ground, often in front of terrified children. Homes were torn apart in frantic searches for rocks or powder that could fit in a spoon. These operations, intended for high-level traffickers, were frequently unleashed on low-level suspects or mistaken addresses. And like any large-scale war, this one did not confine itself to domestic soil. It had a foreign front. The logic was straightforward. If American demand was unquenchable, then the only way to win was to cut off supply at the source. The US turned its gaze southward to the Andean hills and Amazonian jungle, where the humble coca plant still grew. Through the DEA, CIA, and other agencies, the United States funneled billions into Latin America. The strategy was branded with a tidy agricultural term, eradication, but the methods were anything but gentle. Low-flying crop duster planes, often operated by American contractors, sprayed herbicides over swaths of Colombian and Peruvian countryside. The chemical of choice was glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. It killed coca, but it also killed everything else. Yucca, coffee, bananas, subsistence crops with no role in the drug trade. Withered, water sources were contaminated, livestock sickened. Farmers who had planted coca because it was the only crop a distant market would reliably pay for found themselves pushed deeper into poverty and pushed closer to the traffickers for protection and income. In many cases, eradication campaigns strengthened the cartel's hold over rural populations rather than weakening it. The US also poured money into training and arming local security forces, effectively turning national armies into extensions of American drug policy. Radar installations were built, Black Hawk helicopters delivered, intelligence shared. The kingpins Pablo Escobar and later the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers of Cali were singled out as primary targets, their faces plastered on most wanted lists worldwide. The most terrifying weapon in Washington's arsenal, however, was not chemical or ballistic. It was legal: extradition. The prospect of being flown in chains to stand trial in the United States, beyond the reach of bribbable judges and intimidatable witnesses, was the trafficker's worst nightmare. Escobar famously declared that he preferred a grave in Colombia to a cell in the United States, and he waged his terror campaign largely to prevent extradition treaties from taking hold. In time, the pressure worked, at least on paper. Escobar was tracked to a rooftop in Medellin and killed in 1993. The Cali cartel's leaders were either captured or surrendered within a few years. In American and Colombian government circles, there was a genuine sense of triumph. The great cartels had been decapitated. The war, it seemed, had finally claimed its biggest prizes. Yet almost no one asked the obvious follow-up: what happens to a serpent's body when you cut off its head? While planes sprayed fields and commandos stormed mansions, a quieter transformation was unfolding further north, across almost 2,000 kilometers of terrain, the US-Mexico border. Under the old system, Colombian cartels handled nearly everything: cultivation, processing, wholesale transport via the Caribbean corridor, and increasingly shipments via Mexico. But that last leg, the hazardous crossing into US territory, remained a weak point. The border was vast, porous, and patrolled. Colombians lacked the local knowledge and infrastructure to manage it efficiently or safely. For that, they turned to subcontractors, small family-based smuggling groups from Mexican states like Sinaloa, Chihuahua, and Baja California. These clans had been moving contraband liquor, migrants, stolen goods across the line for generations. They understood the desert paths, the river crossings, and crucially, the vulnerabilities of officials on both sides. Initially, the arrangement was simple. The Mexicans were paid a flat fee, so much cash per kilo to move Colombian cocaine into US cities. They were transporters, little more. One man perceived the latent power in this role, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, a former Mexican federal police officer from Sinaloa, later known as El Padrino, the Godfather. Unlike Escobar's showy brutality, Felix Gallardo was methodical, quietly ambitious. He realized that controlling the gateway into the United States was as valuable, and perhaps more, than controlling the source. He consolidated the disparate smuggling families into a loose but coherent federation known as the Guadalajara Cartel. Their primary asset was control of the plaza's strategic smuggling corridors into the U.S. For a period, it was a mutually beneficial symbiosis. Colombians supplied the cocaine. Guadalajara shepherded it across the border and collected its transport fee. But the pressure from the drug war began warping the arrangement. As Colombian cartels came under siege, leaders hunted, labs destroyed, financial networks disrupted, they grew more desperate and less able to dictate terms. Felix Gallardo and his partners saw their opening. They changed the payment structure. They no longer wanted cash, which was bulky and risky. They demanded payment in product. Instead of a few $1,000s per kilo, they wanted 30, then 40, then eventually 50% of every load they moved. Within a few years, the mules had become major wholesalers. With that single shift in compensation, the Mexican organizations were transformed. They were no longer merely couriers. They now possessed substantial quantities of cocaine as their own inventory. They began building their own distribution networks inside the United States, selling directly to mid-level dealers and undercutting the weakened Colombians. The supposed victory over Medellin and Cali had created a huge vacuum. Into that void rushed the Mexican federations. When Felix Gallardo was arrested in 1989, after the kidnapping, torture, and murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena sparked an international outcry. The structure he had built did not dissolve, it fractured. Each major lieutenant retained control of a key plaza, and each evolved into an independent cartel. In the northwest, the Arellano Felix brothers took over the Tijuana route into California. In the center, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, dubbed the Lord of the Skies for his fleet of Boeing 727s, ferrying cocaine controlled the Juarez Corridor. In Sinaloa's rugged mountains, a short, ambitious former poppy farmer named Joaquin Guzman Loera, El Chapo, began consolidating power with his associates, forming what would eventually become the Sinaloa Cartel. The hierarchy of the trade was rewritten. The Colombians, once emperors, were reduced to suppliers, selling cocaine at wholesale prices to Mexican buyers. The Mexicans controlled everything from that point forward: transport, border crossings, U.S. distribution, and the lion's share of the profit. A new narco order emerged with its unofficial capital in Culiacan and its provinces in cities like Tijuana, Juarez, and Matamoros. These groups were wealthier, more diversified, and more deeply rooted in local society than their Colombian predecessors had ever been. The United States, after spending a decade and untold billions dismantling one criminal empire, found that it had inadvertently fertilized the ground for a much more dangerous one. It had killed one dragon only to unleash a hydra. The flood of drug money now ran in both directions. Dollars from American users flowed south in such quantities that they rivaled or exceeded the GDPs of small nations. That income financed the final chilling evolution of the cartels. They ceased to be simply criminal organizations. They began to resemble something much closer to a parallel state. The transformation started with corruption. The offer to officials, from traffic cops to generals, was the same that Escobar had perfected: silver or lead. But in Mexico, the scale and duration of this corruption turned it into something more than an ugly exception. It became a system. Police departments in some jurisdictions effectively became the cartel's private security arms. Military officers leaked operational plans. Politicians pushed or blocked legislation according to the needs of their patrons. Entire institutions were hollowed out and reprogrammed to serve the interests of traffickers. Yet bribery was only part of the story of the narco state. In many rural areas, where the official government was distant, indifferent, or hostile, the cartels filled the vacuum. They fixed roads, paid for church repairs, sponsored local festivals, and handed out food or cash. Disputes that might once have gone before a judge were now brought to the local boss, who dispensed his own brutal form of arbitration. In the absence of state services, the cartels became the police, the welfare office, and the court. They weren't only buying silence, they were buying loyalty. They were weaving themselves into the everyday life of the communities they exploited. Alongside this soft power, their capacity for hard power became terrifying. The cartels began to arm and train themselves, not as gangs, but as armies. They established training camps in remote mountains and jungles. Former soldiers from Mexico's own special forces, as well as from Guatemala, and occasionally even from the United States, were hired as instructors. The most notorious product of this militarization was a group known as Los Zetas. Originally, Los Zetas were the enforcement arm of the Gulf Cartel, formed by deserters from an elite Mexican army unit. Unlike traditional smugglers who had grown violent over time, the Zetas were professional killers who had adopted smuggling as a business. They brought military tactics, encrypted communications, and a calculated embrace of terror. Their arsenal would not have looked out of place in a war zone. 50 caliber sniper rifles that could stop vehicles, rocket-propelled grenades, automatic grenade launchers, and even anti-aircraft weapons. They welded armor plate onto heavy trucks to create makeshift armored personnel carriers, monstruos, or monsters. They routinely engaged Mexican security forces in extended firefights, shot down helicopters, and locked down entire cities. The lines between organized crime and insurgency blurred almost to invisibility. This was no longer a law enforcement issue in any conventional sense. It was a low-intensity civil war, waged neighborhood by neighborhood in cities like Juarez, Tijuana, and Culiacan. One moment crystallized this reality for the world. In October 2019, Mexican forces, guided by U.S. intelligence, moved into Culiacan heartland of the Sinaloa cartel to capture Ovidio Guzman Lopez, one of El Chapo's sons. They succeeded briefly. Within minutes, the city exploded. Convoys of cartel gunmen, heavily armed and well-coordinated, flooded the streets. They set up burning barricades, attacked military bases, seized control of major roadways, and even took soldiers' families hostage. They captured strategic positions across Culiacan, turning the city's avenues into kill zones. Videos of the chaos spread across social media: armored trucks, heavy machine guns chattering, civilians cowering behind cars. The state's monopoly on violence, the core feature that defines a functioning nation, evaporated in real time. After hours of fighting, a shocking order came down from Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. To avoid further bloodshed, he commanded security forces to release Ovidio and stand down. The cartel had forced a national government to retreat. For that afternoon, in that city, the narco state did not merely coexist with official authority. It replaced it. The powder that had started as a stimulant in the mouths of Andean farmers had, in distant echo, financed an armed power capable of overruling a sovereign state in the streets. A slow-motion conquest, paid for 1 gram at a time. While the Mexican syndicates were tightening their grip on the North American market, the Colombians, ever entrepreneurial, looked for new horizons. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the US market was saturated. Prices had leveled off, competition was fierce, and enforcement pressure, though uneven, was constant. Good businessmen diversify. So the cartels gazed east, across the Atlantic, toward a continent rich, densely populated, and with long-standing commercial routes: Europe. At first, their approach was rudimentary, a courier flying from Bogota to Madrid with a few kilos taped under clothing or stitched into luggage linings. A container of coffee beans or bananas bound for Lisbon or Naples with a hidden compartment. These early probes were experiments testing customs procedures, mapping demand, measuring risk. The Colombians rapidly discovered that Europe was not simply another America. Borders were intricate, languages multiple, police forces splintered by jurisdiction and varying competence. They could not run the Miami model by copy and paste. They needed local partners, organizations that already controlled docks, trucking routes, and street networks. They found their ideal ally not in the more famous Sicilian mafia, but in a quieter, more secretive criminal order rooted in the rugged hills of Calabria, the 'Ndrangheta. For decades, the 'Ndrangheta had been underestimated, even within Italy. Clan-based, insular, and fiercely bound by blood ties, they shunned headlines. Their power lay in logistics and discretion. They controlled, through corruption and intimidation, the massive container port of Gioia Tauro in southern Italy, a critical artery in global shipping. Gioia Tauro was the perfect gate. Cargo ships arriving from South America could offload tens of thousands of containers at a time. To find a single metal box stuffed with cocaine hidden among frozen meat or industrial machinery was like looking for a single raindrop in a storm. Especially when port workers, customs agents, and union bosses were on the 'Ndrangheta payroll. The partnership with the Colombians was elegant in its simplicity. The South Americans handled production and transatlantic transport. The Calabrians guaranteed safe entry into Europe and managed distribution. They pushed the product onward to cities from Milan and Munich to London and Barcelona, using their dense web of trucking firms, wholesalers, and front companies. It was a quieter arrangement than the Medellin-style wars. Fewer bombs, more accounting. Shared risk, shared profit. The 'Ndrangheta proved themselves ideal business partners. They were reliable, disciplined, and ruthlessly effective. They paid on time and kept conflicts in-house. Within a short period, hundreds of kilos grew into tons. Europe's appetite for cocaine surged. Bankers in the City of London, traders in Frankfurt, club kids in Ibiza, students in Paris. Cocaine became a staple of the continent's nocturnal economy. As volumes grew, direct shipping routes from Latin America to European ports attracted more scrutiny. Authorities tightened inspection procedures and expanded maritime patrols. Once again, traffickers adapted with cold ingenuity. They turned their eyes to a region that looked, on a smuggler's map, like an opportunity: West Africa. The coastline from Senegal down to Nigeria offered exactly what the cartels sought: weak states, deep poverty, porous borders, and pre-existing smuggling infrastructures built on everything from arms and cigarettes to gemstones and migrants. Tiny Guinea-Bissau, racked by coups and corruption, became infamous as one of the world's first true narco-states beyond the Americas. Senior military and political figures were soon linked openly to cocaine shipments. For traffickers, the logic was simple: get the product onto African soil, and it would be shielded from the most intense enforcement, able to be rerouted at leisure. Large motherships, aging freighters or fishing trawlers, would depart Colombia or Venezuela carrying tons of cocaine. Far off the coast, in international waters, they rendezvoused with smaller, faster boats crewed by West African smugglers. Waterproofed bales were transferred over the waves in the dark, then sped toward isolated beaches or river inlets in countries like Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, or Sierra Leone. Once ashore, the cocaine was stored in safe houses and warehouses, guarded by a blend of corrupt officials, local militias, and criminal networks. In a region already deeply familiar with informal trade, cocaine became just another high-value good. From West Africa, Europe lay only a few hours away by air. Couriers swallowed pellets or strapped packages to their bodies and boarded commercial flights to Lisbon, Paris, Brussels, or Amsterdam. Larger shipments traveled in air cargo, officially frozen fish or exotic fruit, unofficially plastic-wrapped bricks hidden in the load. The boldest runs used private jets with falsified flight plans, landing at small, poorly monitored airfields in Spain, Portugal, or even Central Europe. The sea routes also evolved. Traffickers deployed semi-submersible narco-subs low-profile vessels, often built in the jungles of Colombia, that rode barely above the waves, nearly invisible to radar. Each could carry several tons of cocaine. Some crossed the Atlantic to be scuttled off the coasts of Spain or Portugal, where smaller craft retrieved the cargo. The European corridor was no longer a single traceable path. It had become a web, South America to West Africa to Europe, Colombians partnering with Calabrians, then with Balkan syndicates, then with local gangs in port cities. The Ndrangheta were no longer alone. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the chaos of Yugoslavia's breakup had given rise to a new generation of hardened criminal groups across Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Serbian, Montenegrin, and Albanian networks, staffed by veterans of brutal conflicts, proved exceptionally capable partners. They were multilingual, mobile, and unapologetically violent. They carved out territory in the overland logistics. From southern ports, trucks packed with cocaine-laced cargo rolled north through the Schengen zone's open borders on highways designed for frictionless legal trade. These groups managed mid-level distribution in Germany, Scandinavia, and the UK, often with chilling professionalism. In Antwerp and Rotterdam, the beating hearts of Europe's container trade, another force emerged, the so-called Mokro Mafia, Dutch-Moroccan criminal networks battling for control of port access and wholesale distribution. Their feud spilled out in assassinations of lawyers, journalists, and even the brother of a key witness, sparking national crises in the Netherlands and Belgium. Europe, long imagined as stable and orderly, now had its own cocaine war, less spectacular than Colombia's, but corrosive all the same, fracturing communities and undermining institutions from the North Sea docks to remote villages in West Africa. Even as this global network deepened, the drug itself began to share its market with something new, something even deadlier, not grown in any field, but born entirely in laboratories. A synthetic spectre stepped onto the stage, fentanyl. Its intrusion into the cocaine story was subtle at first. Medical examiners started encountering puzzling overdose cases. Someone supposedly died of cocaine toxicity, but the autopsy showed signs typical of opioids: slowed breathing, pinpoint pupils, respiratory arrest. Initially, doctors assumed deliberate speedballing, a mix of stimulants and heroin. But patterns emerged that didn't fit. Many victims had no known history of opioid use. They were casual users snorting lines on weekends, not people injecting heroin in alleys. Toxicology reports revealed the truth. Many of these people had never knowingly taken an opioid in their lives. The cocaine itself had been contaminated. Fentanyl is completely synthetic. First synthesized in 1959 as a potent anesthetic, it is astonishingly strong, around 50 times more powerful than heroin, roughly 100 times stronger than morphine. A dose the size of a few grains of salt can be lethal to an opioid-naive user. For modern cartels nulled by Mexican organizations like Sinaloa and Jalisco, new generation fentanyl was a dark economic miracle. Its precursor chemicals could be cheaply purchased from factories in China or, increasingly, produced in clandestine Mexican labs. It required no fields, no harvests, no farmers, only chemical know-how and a modest space. Most crucially, its potency made it staggeringly profitable. A kilogram of pure fentanyl, produced for a few $1,000s, could be diluted and sold as hundreds of thousands of single-use doses. Its presence in the cocaine supply followed, at first, from sloppiness. A street-level dealer cutting both heroin and cocaine on the same scale, or using the same mixing container without cleaning it, could leave behind enough microscopic residue to be fatal. A user would snort what they believed to be cocaine and quietly ingest a lethal opioid dose. Soon, though, contamination became strategic. From a purely mercenary standpoint, mixing fentanyl into cocaine offered two key advantages. First, it extended volume. Cocaine is expensive. If a dealer could bulk it out with a cheaper yet powerful additive, profits increased. Second, fentanyl's extreme addictiveness could hook users more deeply and in a fundamentally different way. Someone who thought they were just chasing a stimulant high might unknowingly develop an opioid dependency. The combined effect was confusing and dangerous. Instead of the expected clean, energizing lift followed by a come-down, users felt a strange overlay. The buzz of cocaine coupled with the heavy, sedating drag of an opioid. For those who survived the experience, this bizarre mixture could become the new baseline they unconsciously sought, leading them back to the same batch, the same dealer. The public health consequences were catastrophic. Cocaine users, as a group, overlapped only partially with opioid users. Many were social or recreational consumers who associated their drug with confidence, talkativeness, and staying out late, not with nodding off, overdose, or Narcan. They were unprepared. No tolerance, no test strips, no antidote on hand. A line at a party or in a club bathroom, once seen as a risky indulgence, had become a game of Russian roulette with a growing number of loaded chambers. The broader opioid crisis in the United States, already in its second wave driven by heroin after the pill epidemic, now surged into a third, more lethal phase dominated by synthetic opioids, especially fentanyl. Overdose deaths soared, crossing the grim threshold of 100,000 per year. A significant rising share of those deaths involved cocaine combined, intentionally or not, with fentanyl. The risk calculus for millions of people shifted. Every small-time dealer became, in effect, a potential executioner. They might not even know the strength of what they were selling. The major Mexican cartels moved fervently into fentanyl production, pressing it into counterfeit prescription pills. Fake oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, and lacing it into heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine. They used the same trafficking infrastructure honed on cocaine: tunnels, trucks, hidden compartments, corrupt officials at border crossings. The white powder that once symbolized glamour and upward mobility had become all too often a delivery system for a colorless, odorless synthetic killer produced in hidden labs thousands of miles away. The great confidence trick of cocaine had entered its deadliest chapter. What had always been a dangerous indulgence became increasingly a single-bump death lottery. And so, after this long journey from mountain leaf to laboratory crystal, from sacrament to status symbol to weapon of war, we reach the wreckage and try to take stock. The legacy of cocaine is not properly captured in case law or policy documents. It is written into landscapes, institutions, and human bodies. Start with the land. The Amazon basin, often called the lungs of the planet, carries deep wounds from the cocaine economy. To plant coca, forests are cleared with chainsaws and fire. Slash and burn agriculture devours ancient trees to make space for illegal rows of shrubs. The soil, thin and fragile, is exhausted quickly. In a few years, yields drop and farmers move deeper into the rainforest, cutting again, burning again, leaving behind a patchwork of scars. Then comes the chemistry. Turning coca leaves into coca paste, the precursor to refined cocaine, is a dirty and poisonous process. It seldom happens in labs with proper waste disposal. Instead, it unfolds in makeshift jungle kitchens with open drums and mud floors. Leaves are soaked in gasoline or kerosene to strip out the alkaloid. Sulfuric acid, caustic soda, and potassium permanganate are used in crude purification. When the job is done, the leftover chemicals don't get treated. They get dumped. Poured onto soil, they sterilize it. Flushed into streams, they kill fish and seep into the drinking water of isolated communities. Entire micro-ecosystems die silent collateral damage in the journey from leaf to line. For every gram of cocaine inhaled in a club or hotel room far away, a corresponding shadow in fuel and acid and dead water lies somewhere in the Amazon. Then look at institutions. Cocaine money is like acid in another sense. It dissolves what it touches. In Colombia in the 1980s and 90s, in Mexico in the 2000s and 2010s, drug revenues ate away at states from the inside. Legal systems, police forces, political parties, everything had a price. The narcos' offer to authority figures was explicit: take the money and collaborate, or refuse and die. Enough people chose money that entire agencies effectively came under cartel control. Those who chose integrity often paid with their lives. Judges, journalists, reformers, that thin line between law and lawlessness erased one by one. In such environments, the state's ability to deliver basic justice and safety collapses. Ordinary people learn quickly that denouncing a trafficker is pointless or suicidal. Over time, citizens begin turning to the local boss for decisions and help. The official government becomes a distant rumor. The cartel becomes the lived reality. This pattern is not confined to Latin America. In parts of West Africa, cocaine money has fueled coups, corrupted militaries, and financed political campaigns. The narco-economy does not just distort weak states, it colonizes them. Finally, consider the human pyramid built under this trade. At the base is the cocalero, the coca farmer. He is not a kingpin or a villain. He is usually a poor campesino, living in remote terrain with few options, growing the only crop that international markets reliably pay him for. He lives squeezed between traffickers who demand loyalty and governments that arrive in helicopters to destroy his fields. His choice is an illusion. Above him are the lab workers and cooks, breathing toxic fumes in jungle refineries, paid in cash and treated as disposable. Then the mules, desperate couriers who swallow dozens of condoms filled with cocaine or strap bricks to their bodies before boarding a plane, praying not to be stopped and praying those fragile packages do not rupture inside them. Higher still are the sicarios, the cartel gunmen often recruited as teenagers from slums and war zones. For them, murder becomes a job description and life expectancy a loose concept. Battles between cartels over smuggling routes resemble campaigns of terror more than conventional warfare. Roadside executions, bodies on bridges, mass graves, ritualized mutilation, and displays of severed heads designed to sear fear into the public imagination. The body count is almost impossible to record, tens of thousands killed in Mexico alone, many more in Colombia across decades of conflict, untold casualties in consumer countries' overdoses, gang shootings, collateral damage. And at the top of this bleak pyramid sits the consumer. In one sense, they are victims drawn in by a powerful neurochemical feedback loop, often self-medicating trauma, depression, or emptiness. In another sense, they are the indispensable engine. Every sniffed line in a spotless bathroom, every bump at a concert, every gram bought for a house party sends a signal down the chain. There is money to be made, whatever the cost. That signal moves outward into the fields, into the labs, into the bribe envelopes, into the guns. Cocaine's greatest and most persistent trick has been to shrink this enormous global machinery of suffering into a neat white line on a mirror, to present itself as a private vice, a little secret, a bit of fun, to sell the illusion of clarity, energy, and power, while hiding the violence, corruption, and poison that make that illusion possible. Its true legacy is not found in glamorous montages or nostalgic stories of wild nights. It lies in the eroded hillsides of the Amazon, in the police files of bombed courthouses, in the mass graves on desert ranches, and in the statistics of overdose deaths. It is a legacy written in two things: blood and powder. And it will continue to be written as long as the desire for that fleeting rush outweighs the willingness to look at the cost.